calling from, please?
This is Todd from Cleveland. Rabbi Singer, I'm curious to hear what you think about something called the Orthodox Rabbinic Statement on Christianity. It was adopted in December of 2015. This is Rabbi Shlomo Riskin's group, if you're familiar with that. They adopted the statements of a number of the European rabbis. I could list a whole bunch of names: Samson Rachel Hirsch, Jacob Emden, among others.
One of the things you want to do is, if you can not name names, that would make it much easier for me to comment. The moment you start naming names, and I just say this to all the viewers, it inhibits my ability to respond, because then it gets personal. I never bring up names, so I can more freely respond to it if no names come up.
And I can appreciate that. The gist, I guess, of what they say is Christianity is okay for Gentiles, but not for Jews. It's a different position than Maimonides. So I was wondering if you could comment about that.
Are we clear, Rabbi?
So that's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for calling in. Go ahead and hang up now and tune in for the answer, okay?
Thank you.
You bet. All right, very good. Go ahead, Rabbi.
So that's really an unfortunate statement, because you would have to believe that God is happy with his creations, who are created in his image, worshiping a man. You would have to believe that. And we know from the Bible that's not true. We know from Scripture that Abraham, who was the father of the Jewish people, was not a Jew, was a Mesopotamian, whose father was an idol worshiper, rejected all of it, all idolatry, and turned to the one God of Abraham. That's how we know him today. I understand why rabbis would say that, and that's because they want to have an ecumenical relationship with Christians. It's the only possible reason why someone would express something like that. We all want to get along. So you will have people saying, oh, we all worship the same God. Because we're living in a time when people are not getting along, we want to get along. So people will say things that blur the truth. No, it's true that if someone is a Unitarian Christian, so that person really does worship one God. It's not a perfect worship, but it's not idolatry. But to say that about Trinitarian Christians is not correct, and it is toxic for every single person. And we should never engage in this low expectation for non-Jews when they could be raised up. And if you dare not lead the nations properly, the nations are going to come to you. And I say that to all Jewish leaders and ask you, why were you silent? Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you explain this to us? Why didn't you wake us up? Why didn't you remind us that Trinitarian belief is an abomination? We really would have rather known that. You don't have to be obnoxious when you speak to a Christian, but to convey to non-Jews that it's good and okay for them to worship a man as God, that's a good thing, is nonsense. It's not based on any Jewish law. Now, I'm going to explain to you where it comes from in a moment. But it is, people should stop doing that. You're not helping Christians. And thank God I'm able to have a voice to speak out about this topic. It's very important for people to understand that this is not Mark chapter 7, where somehow non-Jews are dogs and, oh yeah, you can have some polluted view of the nature of God and the Godhead. It's okay for you because you're just a Gentile. That's not okay. And what is okay is the true knowledge of God, and that all the nations will speak in a pure speech. Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. I mean, that's the whole messianic hope, is that all the nations will worship the true God, because the knowledge of God will cover the world as the water covers the sea. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9. The point is, in these passages, it's that the non-Jews were wrong, and they're going to finally get it at the end of days. The whole messianic hope is umbilically connected to a true following of God by whom? By the nations of the world, the Goyim. That's the whole point. The whole point is that in Jeremiah 16, verse 19 and 20, the non-Jews, the Goyim, the word Gentile is really a Latin word. I'm using because it's convenient, but we didn't come up with that word. But the nations will come to you, the Jews, and say, we've inherited lies and vanity where there's no truth. How can a man make unto himself gods when they're not? It is the worst thing in the world for a non-Jew to believe in anything but the one true God, and not worship nothing else, adore nothing else, pray to no one else but the true God. And we don't all worship the same God. So I do understand why there would be a feeling that we need to be ecumenical and we all get along. We all really these are different pathways to the true God. These are not different pathways to the true God. Trinitarian belief is idolatry. In fact, it's the worst iteration of idolatry. The prohibition against a partnership precedes and is more important than the prohibition against worshiping idols. Lo yihye lecha elihim acherem al panai, Exodus chapter 20, just see the first three verses, precedes, trumps the prohibition that you should not worship any graven image, anything that flies in the heaven above or on the earth below, and the precedes that, because a partnership has to be worse. The type of idolatry that Christians engage in has to be worse because Christians worship the true God the Father. Christians all believe that the Father is God. All of them believe that. In addition to that, they venerate and worship his Son, they believe, as God as well, who's part of a three-part Godhead. A homostasis, an idea that is a Christian invention. Its antecedents are found in the Christian Bible, but it really is born later in the writings of Ignatius, in what is articulated by Tertullian and others in the 2nd century, where he invents the word Trinity. He was a church father from Carthage, on the African continent, and would develop until it would be hammered out as an orthodoxy at the Council of Nicaea. But it was an idea that was long predated the Council of Nicaea in 325. It is the worst thing for a person to believe that in the true God, and in addition, there's something else that's worthy of worship. It's the worst thing in the world. And I'm sorry that anyone would teach that. And strangely, it's taught to people who are really told to people who are really nice people, who really would be very receptive to hearing why Jesus is not God. Because if he isn't God and you worship him as God, even Christians will concede that the doctrine of the Trinity is idolatry. Every Christian will tell you that if Jesus is not God and you worship him as God, it is an act of idolatry. They will reluctantly concede that point. So it is a mistake to say that. I understand why they're saying it. Like we all believe the same thing, and the idea is to have but it's a huge mistake. You're not doing them a favor. It is much better to say that cigarette smoking will kill you, not in one way, but in many ways. In every bad way you can imagine, cigarette smoking will kill you. Not immediately, not the first puff. It's not like blowing your brains out with a 44 Magnum. It's a long, prolonged death that leads to heart attack, stroke, cancer, and everything, every horrible thing. And the best thing is to tell people don't smoke. It's bad for you. Now, you're probably asking the question, well, where does this even come from? Like, why would it, like, so I'm going to explain to you, and here we're going to get very technical in Jewish law to explain how could someone even, why do I hear this around? That it's okay for the non-Jew. Now, I'm the one who cares about the non-Jew, because I'm speaking for them. I'm saying, come home. Put away that filth. But I might as well explain the whole deal. So, like, how did that become that? How did anyone get it wrong? All right, so there is a disagreement, not if the Trinity is idolatry. There's no disagreement on that. But there is a view that's an outlier, but I'll explain it to you. And it's on a real technicality of Jewish law. It's not, there is no disagreement. No, there is no position that doctrine of the Trinity is idolatry. No one holds that position. 0 people. You know, oh, what's going on? Like, how did that thing start? So there is, in Jewish law, it is forbidden for a Jew to engage in commerce with an idol worshiper immediately prior to his holiday. As an example. Why? The Jew is not allowed to do anything that would promote idolatry. You can't do something that makes it easier for an idol worshiper to engage in his idol worship. It's forbidden. Before the blind, you may not put a stumbling block. The Jew cannot behave in a way that will lead to non-Jews sinning. Cannot. Another example. A Jew in Jewish law cannot take as a business partner someone who engages in idolatry. Cannot do it. Now, you might think that's a boycott. It isn't. The reason for that is different than you would anticipate. The concern is that if you take a business partner, long-term business partner who worships idols, eventually you're going to have a falling out. You're going to have a disagreement over, and your idol worshiping friend, partner, will then swear in the name of his God that what he is saying is true as a result of your financial partnership. And therefore you can't have a business partner who worships idols, because it will ultimately lead to that person worshiping idols. Your very partnership will trigger the non-Jew to worship idols, to swear in the name of his idol. And that's an absolutely forbidden practice under the 7 Noahide laws. You understand that? Okay. Therefore, according to this position, which is the consensus, as you mentioned, Maimonides, War of Jews, and so on. Therefore, a Jew could not take a business partner who's a Christian, who's a religious Christian. Why? Maimonides would tell you very clearly, because one day you're going to have a falling out, and the guy's going to say, I swear in the name of Jesus, and that's an act of idolatry, an absolute forbidden act for a ben Noach. You understand? Now, there is a view that is essentially the view of the Meiri. The Meiri was a French rabbi, medieval period, early. And he had a very unique view, and his view is not that the Trinity is not idolatry, but because the direct prohibition against a shutfus, which means a partnership, is expressed in the Ten Commandments, and the non-Jews were never warned about that iteration of idolatry. After all, they were not at Mount Sinai. Therefore, you can have a partnership with them. The reason is not that it's good for a Gentile, but you then don't have to make multiple assumptions. Whenever you have a question upon a question in Jewish law, whenever you have what happens if that happens? But even if that happens, something else might happen, and then something else might happen. So the moment you have what's called a sveka, a question within a question, so then it is no longer illicit. This is very important. So if having a partnership with a non-Jew can cause, an idol worshiper can trigger an idolatrous act in the non-Jew, so then it's a suffix, which means a question, diaraisa from the Torah, and therefore it's forbidden. But what happens if you have a question of whether even non-Jews were ever commanded about shutfus, about partnership? So according to the view of the Meiri, this is Christianity. And therefore, we don't have to be cautious about this. We don't have to make that leap. That's the real source of that. It's going to be repeated over by the Ramah. But that's where this really comes from. So we can say this is a disagreement between Maimonides and the Meiri, two people who lived during roughly the same epoch. The consensus view is the Rambam, but strange way, the practice is that Jews do take partners who are Christians. And I think this is really problematic. But I don't want to deal with that because I want to deal with what you said. To say that it is okay for a non-Jew to worship to believe in the doctrine of the Trinity, that is an inaccurate portrayal of where this comes. It is not okay. This whole issue is on an area of Jewish law about Jewish people doing business with Christians on their holy days, prior to the holy days, and so on. Therefore, being an enabler, or having the sort of relationship with Christians where our very business partnership would directly trigger them to worship idols, and therefore it would be forbidden. So that's what this is about. I know this sounds very picayune, but I just want to illustrate to you how something can go from that small little area. Is there a heter? Is there a way out? That's really the question. Is there an escape hatch so that a Jew can have a business partner with the Christian? Is there any way to escape the prohibition? According to the Meiri, there is an escape hatch so that sort of relationship could be possible. According to Maimonides and literally everybody else, there is no escape hatch. It is not saying that we all worship the same God. That's ridiculous, but that's what happened. And people do not go back to the sources. And as a result of that, people get themselves in an enormous amount of trouble. And there's your answer. I'm very careful in my broadcast not to attack anybody personally I never do that. Missionaries do it all the time. I don't. So when you call one a question, if you just leave people's names out, it makes it easier for me because I don't want to. I know all these people, and I don't want to. Their intent. I haven't had this conversation with them, but whatever. There you go.
Very
Thank you
good.
for your question.
Very good. Rabbi, you got time for